My name is Harvey Milk, and I want to recruit you.
The election results of 1977 sent shockwaves through the gay community in San Francisco. Harvey Milk won a landslide victory in the race for the District 5 Supervisor, making him the first openly gay official in the U.S.
And during such time as I hold the office of Supervisor, City and County of San Francisco. Congratulations, Harvey. Thank you, Mayor.
If a gay person can win, that means we have the right to hope for minority voices if we fight, he told the public with glee. That same night, the public of District 8 also elected Daniel White, a conservative former police officer and firefighter, as supervisor. The media quickly made tacit comparisons. Even on television, Harvey and Dan complimented each other and hoped for a good collaboration. In the first year, indeed, Harvey proposed that the city council appoint Dan as chairman of the Streets and Transportation Committee. When Dan invites Harvey to the christening of his first daughter. But in reality, their relationship is not smooth. Dan represents a predominantly white neighborhood that is heavily prejudiced against the LGBT community. In the 1970s, many psychiatrists still considered homosexuality a mental illness. Meanwhile, San Francisco Mayor George Moscone was an early supporter of gay rights, vetoed anti-gay laws and signed the city's most stringent ordinance, prohibiting residency discrimination and profession with the LGBT community. He became one of the first city officials to overcome barriers and stereotypes. Moscone once said, "If they're the best people I can find, I don't care if they're gay or not." In the eyes of the political world at this time, Harvey Milk was clearly more popular with the mayor than Dan. Dan thinks that being isolated in the radical government and full of new ideas, gradually accumulates petty contradictions. On November 10, 1978, Dan sent a letter to Mayor George Moscone announcing his resignation from the Board of Supervisors. 8 days later, during a meeting with leaders of the Police Officers Association, Dan was told by them that his resignation had caused great damage. Dan reconsidered his decision, then asked the mayor to reappoint him to his old position. The mayor agreed and said, "Everyone has the right to change their mind." Harvey Milk learned of the news, quickly arranged a meeting with the mayor and insisted that Dan's reappointment would harm the mayor's agenda. You could lose the support of the city's gay community with this decision. The mayor heard this and was shaken. Dan was fully aware of this meeting, growing more and more afraid that he would lose his job because of Harvey. 2 days later, Dan is watching some football, cleaning around the house, reading a book and having a short chat with his wife. Just before 11 p.m., when White was trying to sleep on his couch, the phone rang. The caller was a reporter for a San Francisco television station. She told White that she had just learned that the mayor had decided to appoint another person to Dan's place the next day. She asked Dan if he had reacted to the news. After a sleepless night brooding, around 10:15 a.m. on November 27, 1978, Dan arrived at City Hall. He carried a loaded .38 caliber revolver with him. After being taken down to City Hall, he went around the side entrance and instead went through the metal detector and went inside through an open window. He was invited into office by the mayor and informed that he would not be reappointed. Seeing Dan so distraught, the mayor invited him into the back room for a drink, but was immediately shot 4 times by Dan, killing him on the spot. Dan left the mayor's office through a back exit, loaded his gun, and strode to the office of his opponent, Harvey Milk. Dan accused his colleague of masterminding his overthrow to appoint someone else on the same side. But Harvey has denied involvement. Feeling that he wasn't getting any straight answers, Dan pulled out his gun and fired 5 rounds. Dan ran into his assistant's office screaming for his car keys. Key in hand, he rushed out of City Hall and called his wife, went to the church to pick her up and together went to the police station to surrender. At 11:20 a.m. on the same day, the San Francisco police chief and the chairman of the Board of Supervisors announced to the press, Mayor and Supervisor Harvey Milk were shot and killed. Supervisor Dan White is the suspect. Silence enveloped San Francisco. That night, candles in hand, a crowd of 40,000 marched from Castro to City Hall to pay their respects to the deceased mayor and leader of San Francisco's gay movement. Today was, without a doubt, the saddest day in the history of San Francisco, said District Attorney Joseph Freitas, who later prosecuted Dan. On May 22, 1979, many San Francisco people sat at the television, listening to the radio and reading the newspaper about the trial of Dan White. Facing 2 counts of murder, if convicted, Dan faces the possibility of the death penalty for committing the crime in a special case where the victim is a public official. However, after 5 days of deliberation, a jury of 7 women and 5 men found Dan White guilty of 2 counts of voluntary manslaughter with a maximum penalty of 8 years. The prosecutor was disappointed by the verdict. "I don't think justice has been done. This is a crazy jury." The reaction from the gay community has been more intense than criticism. About 5,000 protesters, many of them gay, took part in a violent protest against the court's ruling that rocked San Francisco, injuring more than 150 people and causing property damage. Production of more than $1 million. The judge sentenced Dan White to 7 years in prison. After less than 5 years at Soledad State Prison, he was pardoned on January 7, 1984, secretly away from his family in Los Angeles for a year, and then asked to return to San Francisco. The city's new mayor issued a public statement, asking him not to be allowed to do so. Suppressed by the fear of reprisal, the marriage fell apart. Dan became increasingly depressed, eventually committing suicide with carbon monoxide poisoning in his car, dying at the age of 39. The story of this assassination is told in the Oscar-winning documentary The Times of Harvey Milk, which premiered in 1984, the year before Dan White committed suicide. In 2009, President Barack Obama posthumously awarded Harvey Milk the Presidential Medal of Freedom, and California declared Harvey's birthday, May 22, as Milk Harvey Day. In 2019, Milk Harvey was the first inductee on the National LGBTQ Hall of Fame.